Well, hello, Mitchell Berean. Welcome to the next week, week 6 of our fall campaign called Mission Critical. We're focusing in on our new mission statement for us as a church. This mission statement reflects where we're at, where we're going, where we see God leading us into the future. So it's real important that we all get in sync with this and connect to it and learn it. And so we're unpacking this mission statement. We've looked at the first 2 steps in the last 4 weeks. And the first step was that we're a church on mission. And so we looked at what the mission is. And then we learned that the mission is to raise up disciple makers. And so we unpacked what it means to be a disciple and what it means to be a disciple maker. And this week we're into step 3, which is that we share the gospel. Disciple makers who share the gospel where we live, work, and play. This week we'll look at what it means to share the gospel, what's involved in that. Next week, we'll look at the mission field where we live, work, and play, and how God has us in this mission field doing his work. And so as we think about what it means to share the gospel, I realize that as a Christian, and for many Christians, it's one of the things that terrifies us the most is talking to someone else about our faith. Having a conversation with someone else about spiritual things. It can cause some people to get cold sweats, to just, have nightmares at night, to envision all kinds of horrible things that could happen to them and will happen to them if they were to have a spiritual conversation with somebody else, or even reveal that they're a Christian. Truth is that we live in a world where there are a lot of mean people, and there are people that are really harsh and hard on us, and they will be cruel at times. And I know many people have experienced that, even sometimes as they tried to talk to somebody about God or to reflect the fact that they were a Christian. And so that fear is reasonable that many people have. But what we need to understand is that there is an order to this work, and what we really want to learn today is we want to focus in on the things that we're called to do, that God expects us to do, but then there's the things that only he can do and that he's not asking us to do. And I think when we get that balance down and we get that figured out, it will help us with this willingness to talk to other people. And so it can feel forced and contrived at times in the way some churches have approached evangelism or just reaching out to others. A lot of times has been kind of with a lot of pressure on it. We don't need to do that. And as a church, I'm not wanting to do that. I want us all to find our natural way to talk to others in those places where we're at in our life, in the flow of life with people that we know. And so I think this is something we can all grab a hold of. I want to encourage you that you can do this. God has equipped you to do it and empowered you to do it. And so you are able to do it. And so hopefully through this lesson, you'll be encouraged with that. We want to look at some of the things in the scripture that the Bible tells us. What is it that God expects of us? Well, one of the things we see in scripture is that we're to always be ready to share a reason for the hope that we have. We're supposed to be ready, willing, and able to talk to others. There's an idea of testimony in there, that we're willing to testify and we're ready to testify. It's interesting to me as I've gone through life that and I've been a pastor too for many years, that there's this idea that a lot of people say is out there that people don't want to hear about your faith. They don't want to hear about Jesus, and they don't want to hear about your Christianity, and people actually don't like Christians, and there's a lot of negative around this. Well, this attitude and idea of, that there's 2 subjects you're supposed to stay away from when you're in public, and that is politics and religion, is certainly out there in our culture. I remember my oldest daughter graduated from college, and she was dating a guy who's from Rapid City, and so she moved there so they could continue to pursue that relationship. She got a job where she was kind of a caseworker, and there were other young people in the office with her, and there was another young woman who, as my daughter would bring up topics of politics and culture and things going on in the world, she didn't know anything about it. And one day she told my daughter, she said, well, I wasn't raised this way to talk about this stuff. She said, in our house, growing up, we never talked about politics and religion. And to which my daughter said, well, that's all we talked about in my house growing up was politics and religion. And so I know this attitude's out there, and sometimes we feel that pressure against it. But I want to remind us of what our role is. So there's that testify attitude and willingness and readiness to just testify to what we know and who we know and what's happened in our lives in and through Jesus. And so that's a part of it. The Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 3 kind of reflects and teaches this aspect of what we do, what our role is. And he kind of is doing it in the context where the church there had to have factions based on what pastor they liked. And Paul was one of the pastors and Apollos was another pastor, and they were having divisions about who was the better pastor and who they were going to be aligned with. And Paul challenges them on this because, of course, that's a very dysfunctional way in which to be a Christian, is to attach yourself to human leaders in such a way that you would, have disagreements and fractures with other Christians. And so Paul tries to set them straight in this. He says, after all, who's Apollos and who's Paul? We are only God's servants through whom you believe the good news. So we helped you become Christians, become followers of Jesus. He says, each of us did the work the Lord gave us to do. I planted the seed in your hearts, Apollos watered it, but it was God who made it grow. It's not important who does the planting or who does the watering. It's important, what's important is that God makes the seed grow. And so he's just pointing out to them. And through this lesson, we learn that our role is not to help people grow. It's not to get them to follow Jesus and to grow in that. Our job is to plant spiritual seeds and to water them. That's all you're supposed to do. You're just like in farming. You can plant seeds, you can water them, but no farmer can make the seed grow. That's only something God can do. And in the same way, this is the role, this is the way it works in the spiritual realm. And so remember this, another scripture tells us that no one comes to the Father unless the Spirit draws him. And so there's the work of God going on. You and I walk through life. And really what we're looking for, and we have to test out through conversation, is someone that the Father is drawing, or the Spirit is drawing, that God's at work in their life. People like that all over the place. I guarantee you have people that you don't even know around you who God's at work in their life. And so really your only job in that, which we'll talk about later, is to just be someone who is willing, ready, can see what's happening, and you're ready to testify. You're ready to help someone as those conversations come up. Romans 10, the Apostle Paul here again gives some instruction on how this works. Verse 13, he says, for everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Verse 14, but how can they call on him to save them unless they believe in him? And how can they believe in him if they've never heard about him? And how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? And how will anyone go and tell them without being sent? That's why the scriptures say, how beautiful are the feet of messengers who bring good news. And so we simply are to be messengers, bringing the good news. We're to testify. There's this progression, and the reality is that God has placed on us the responsibility. We're his plan A, and there is no plan B. The way in which others will find out about Jesus and be able to make a decision to follow him is through you and me, as we are faithful to do our part. And God is the only one that can save them. God's the only one that can rescue them. But you and I are the only ones who will tell them about him. And so there is this privilege that we have to be the bearers of the good news of the gospel. We want to be prepared to do that. We want to be ready. So let's review as you go into your life group lesson. We'll unpack this a little bit. But remember, what is our part? It's important to know our part, know God's part. Our part, love God, which we talked about last week. Love people. So we're really to be growing to love people and to see people as the spiritual beings they are, made in the image of God, that Jesus died for them. So we have this compassion for them. We treat other people like God would. And so we're growing as disciples to be a reflection of God. We interact with people like God would. And so we become that conduit for others to experience God through us. And then we identify ourselves as followers of Jesus. We've got to identify in some way who we are, who we are aligned with, that we follow him. And so that's just in the course of relationship and knowing people and being around them. You're going to find out that we believe Jesus and we're following him. Next is we're to live on mission. And that means that as you live your life, you want to be aware of the spiritual need in the people around you and be ready to minister to them as opportunities open. And they always do if you're around people for any length of time. These things happen. Be willing and able to share. So be willing to share your testimony. What is it that God's done in your life? Be ready to share the gospel. There's some tools that we have available that help us do this. There's the Romans Road. There's the Bridge to Life. There is 4 Spiritual Laws. There's the one we've taught around here a lot, which is Life in 6 Words. Whatever it is, you want to be able to share the gospel in a very simple, clear way from the scriptures. Here's how you get enter into a relationship with Jesus. Here's how you receive God's forgiveness and begin to walk with him. And it's very important that if you get the opportunity to do that we ask someone, do you want to trust in him? Do you want to put your faith in Jesus? And that's very important, part of our role. But then what does God do? Well, God draws people to himself. God opens people up spiritually. And then God is the only one that saves them. And God's the only one that grows them. And so it's important we understand our part and God's part, and that we're ready to do our part. In your lesson today, you're going to look at this a little bit more and maybe learn some ways to share the gospel, and hope we practice that a little bit so you're ready and willing and able when the time comes to help lead somebody else to faith in Jesus. It's one of the greatest privileges you can ever have, one of the most powerful things that you could ever do, and I want all of us to be able to experience that. So God bless you. I encourage you as you go through this lesson, embrace it, grow in it, overcome the uncomfortableness that we have about this, and just realize that God's with you. And if you do your part, he'll do his, and we'll see amazing things happen. We'll see people come to faith and get saved. And that's what we want to do as a church. So God bless you. Enjoy your lesson. We'll see you next week.